The first thing you learn about hauling cargo to the rim worlds is that the universe doesn't give a damn about your schedule. The second thing is that ion storms don't wait for convenient timing. I was 3 hours out from Kepler's Ridge when my ship's proximity alarm started screaming like a banshee with its tail caught in a reactor vent. Through the viewports of my freight hauler, the Dusty Rose, I watched the sky above the frontier world of Meridian Prime turn the colour of old blood. Lightning that could fry a man's brain from 50 miles away danced between clouds that looked like they'd been forged in hell's own foundry. "Well, ain't that just perfect?" I muttered, killing the alarms with a sharp slap to the console. My cargo hold was packed tight with atmospheric processors, weather drones that were supposed to help the settlers below tame this wild world's storms. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to get swallowed by the very thing my cargo was meant to fight. My name's Captain Vera Cross, and I've been flying the trade routes between the core worlds and the frontier for the better part of 15 years. I've seen pirates, plague ships, and solar flares that could blind you permanent. But I'd never seen an iron storm build this fast, this fierce. The comm crackled to life, filled with static that sounded like angry hornets. "Aye day! Any vessel in—" The voice cut in and out. "Urgency broadcast from Meridian Prime." I adjusted the frequency, trying to cut through the electromagnetic interference. "This is Captain Cross aboard the Dusty Rose. Come in, Meridian Prime." "Captain Cross." The relief in the voice was palpable. "Thank God. This is Administrator Chen at New Providence Settlement. We've got a situation down here." Through the static, Chen's words painted a picture that made my blood run cold. The ion storm wasn't just passing through, it was settling in. The electromagnetic field was intensifying, creating a permanent barrier that would cut Meridian Prime off from the rest of the galaxy. Any ship caught in orbit when it solidified would be trapped forever, their electronics fried, their crews slowly dying in the black. "How long do we have?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. 4 hours, maybe 5. After that, nothing gets in or out for the next century. I stared at the storm front rolling across the planet's surface like a living thing. Below, scattered across the northern continent, were 7 settlements with a combined population of maybe 3,000 souls. Good people who'd come to this world looking for a fresh start, a chance to build something with their own hands. "What do you need from me, Chen?" "We're evacuating the outer settlements to New Providence. It's the only place with deep enough caves to ride out the permanent storm, but we've got a problem. There's 43 people stranded at Copper Creek, about 60 miles north of here. The ground vehicles can't make it through the terrain, and the atmospheric interference is too strong for aircraft." I looked at my cargo manifest. 12 atmospheric processors, each one worth more than most people saw in a year. My contract with Meridian Prime was already paid, but if I took the Dusty Rose down into that storm, there was no guarantee I'd get her back up again. "I can set down near Copper Creek," I said, making the decision before my practical side could talk me out of it. "But I'll need someone who knows the terrain. It's rough country between there and New Providence." "We've got just the man. Marcus Thorne. He's a surveyor, knows every rock and ravine between here and the polar ice caps. I'll have him meet you at the landing coordinates." I was already adjusting my descent vector, feeling the Dusty Rose shudder as we hit the outer edges of the storm. Lightning flashed across the hull, and I could smell ozone in the recycled air. "Send me those coordinates, Chen, and pray to whatever gods you favour that we make it back in time." The landing was rougher than a bronco with a burr under its saddle. The Dusty Rose touched down in a clearing of red dust and scattered boulders, her landing struts groaning under the strain. Through the viewports, I could see the settlement of Copper Creek, a handful of prefab buildings and atmospheric processors clustered around a natural spring. The sky above was the colour of a fresh bruise, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with electrical charge. I was running through post-landing checks when someone pounded on the airlock. I cycled it open to find a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same red stone as the landscape around us. He was tall, weathered, with eyes the colour of storm clouds and a beard that had seen too many frontier winters. "Marcus Thorne," he said, extending a calloused hand. "You must be the crazy pilot who's willing to fly into an ion storm." "Vera Cross," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, honest, and I prefer professionally reckless to crazy. Behind him, I could see the settlers of Copper Creek gathering their belongings, families with children, elderly couples who'd probably spent their life savings on the journey out here, young adults with dreams of taming a new world. 43 souls, all counting on me to get them home safe. "What's our route?" I asked Thorne as we watched the settlers load their most precious possessions onto hover sleds. He unrolled a topographical map across my nav console, his finger tracing a winding path through canyons and ridgelines. "Direct route would take us through Devil's Throat, a narrow canyon that floods when the atmospheric processors kick into overdrive. With this storm, it'll be a death trap. What's the alternative? We go around through the broken hills. It's twice the distance, but the terrain's more forgiving. Problem is, it puts us right in the path of the storm's worst fury." I studied the map, calculating distances and time. "How long?" "On foot with families and elderly? 8 hours, maybe 10. I looked at my chronometer. We had 4 hours until the storm became permanent. We'll have to move fast. "Captain," Thorne said, his voice quiet but urgent, "there's something else you should know. The broken hills aren't just dangerous because of the terrain. There's a reason the settlers avoid that area." "What kind of reason?" "Raiders. A group calling themselves the Iron Serpents. They've been hitting the outer settlements for months, taking supplies, equipment, sometimes people. Their base is somewhere in the hills." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "How many?" 20, maybe 30. Well armed, well organized. They've been waiting for something like this. A chance to hit a large group when help can't come. Through the viewports, I watched a young mother helping her daughter secure a stuffed animal in a travel pack. An old man carefully wrapping a holographic picture of Earth in protective cloth. These people had already lost everything once when they left the core worlds. Now they were about to lose it all again. "Then we'll have to make sure they don't find us," I said, checking the charge on my sidearm. "How well do you know those hills?" A grim smile crossed Thorne's weathered face. "Well enough. There are old mining tunnels throughout the range, most of them flooded or collapsed, but a few might still be passable. If we can avoid the main route, stick to the abandoned paths, it's worth a shot." I sealed the map in a waterproof case. "Let's get these people moving." The evacuation took 30 minutes we couldn't afford to lose. Families saying goodbye to homes they'd spent years building, children clutching toys they'd have to leave behind, elderly couples helping each other with packs that seemed too heavy for their frail shoulders. I found myself thinking of my own family, lost to a transport accident when I was barely old enough to hold a pilot's license. These people still had each other, still had hope. I wasn't about to let them lose that. Thorne proved to be worth his weight in processed platinum. He moved through the group like a shepherd, helping organize supplies, assigning the strongest settlers to help the weakest, making sure everyone understood the route and the dangers ahead. When a teenage boy complained about leaving behind his gaming console, Thorne knelt down and spoke to him quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but whatever he said, the boy nodded and helped his younger sister with her pack. "We move in 3 groups," Thorne announced as we prepared to depart. "Families with small children in the middle, strongest adults at the front and rear. Captain Cross and I will scout ahead, but if we run into trouble, you scatter and find cover. Don't try to be heroes." The storm was getting worse. Lightning struck the ground around us with increasing frequency, and the air tasted of copper and ozone. My ship's hull was already showing scorch marks from the electromagnetic discharge, and I could feel static electricity building in my hair. "Time to go," I said, shouldering my pack. It contained emergency supplies, medical kit, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. I hoped it would be enough. The first 2 hours were the hardest. The terrain was brutal. Loose shale that shifted under our feet, ravines that appeared without warning, and air so charged with electricity that our hair stood on end. The settlers were tough, tougher than I'd expected, but they weren't used to this kind of forced march. We had to stop every 20 minutes to let the elderly rest, to help children over difficult passages, to redistribute supplies when someone's pack became too heavy. Thorn moved like a ghost through the landscape, always 50 metres ahead, signalling back with hand gestures when he spotted safe routes or potential dangers. The man knew this country, like I knew the shipping lanes between worlds, and I found myself trusting his judgment completely. We were 3 hours into the journey when he held up a closed fist, the signal to stop and take cover. I crept forward to where he crouched behind a boulder, looking down into a narrow valley. Below us, a group of men in mismatched armour were setting up what looked like an ambush position. Their vehicles, jury-rigged hoverbikes and an armoured transport, were hidden behind rock formations, and I could see the glint of rifle barrels among the stones. "Iron serpents," I whispered. Thorn nodded grimly. "They know about the evacuation. Probably figured we'd come this way." I counted at least 15 raiders, all armed with military-grade weapons. Behind us, 43 civilians were counting on us to get them to safety. The math was simple and ugly. "There's another route," Thorn said, consulting his map. "An old mining road that cuts through the eastern ridge. It's been abandoned for years, probably unstable, but it might get us around them." "How much time would that add?" 2 hours, maybe 3. I looked at my chronometer. We had 90 minutes before the storm became permanent. We don't have 3 hours. "Then what do you suggest?" I studied the raider position, looking for weaknesses. They were well positioned to ambush anyone coming through the main valley, but they weren't expecting trouble from above. Their attention was focused downhill toward the route they expected us to take. "We go through them," I said. Thorn stared at me like I'd suggested we sprout wings and fly. "Captain, there are 43 civilians back there, including children and elderly, which is exactly why we can't take a detour we don't have time for." I checked my weapon, making sure the power cell was fully charged. "You said there are mining tunnels in these hills." "Yes, but most of them are flooded or not flooded, unstable. You said the eastern ridge was unstable." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You want to bring down the tunnel. I want to create a distraction. Something loud enough to draw their attention while our people slip through the valley." I pointed to a cluster of mining equipment visible on the ridge above the raiders. "Those look like seismic charges left over from the mining operation. If we can get up there, set them off." "It's crazy enough that it might work," Thorn admitted, "but one of us needs to stay with the group. That'll be you. You know the terrain, and they trust you. Give me 20 minutes to get into position, then start moving them through the valley. When you hear the explosion, run like hell." Thorn gripped my shoulder. "Captain, if this doesn't work, then you get those people to safety anyway. That's an order." The climb to the mining equipment was treacherous. The rock face was loose and crumbling, and more than once I had to freeze in place as stones scattered down toward the raider position below. Lightning struck the ridge above me, close enough that I could feel the heat and smell burning stone. The seismic charges were old but still functional, enough explosive power to bring down half the mountainside, if properly placed. I set them in a line along the weakest part of the tunnel structure, just as I'd seen demolition crews do on mining worlds throughout the rim. The timing mechanism was simple, a basic countdown that would give me enough time to get clear. Through my binoculars I watched Thorn lead the settlers into the valley. They moved like shadows, keeping to the cover of boulders and scrub brush, but I could see the fear in their faces. Children clung to their parents' hands, and the elderly leaned heavily on walking sticks. But they kept moving. The raiders were getting restless. I could see them shifting position, checking their weapons, talking in low voices. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know what. I set the timer for 2 minutes and started my descent. The explosion, when it came, was magnificent and terrible. The ridge collapsed in a cascade of stone and dust that shook the ground for miles around. The sound echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, and I watched the raiders scramble for cover as boulders the size of hovercars crashed down around their position. In the chaos, Thorn led the settlers through the valley at a dead run. I saw him helping an elderly woman over fallen rocks, saw teenage boys carrying younger children, saw families who had never known violence moving with the desperate speed of survival. But the raiders were professionals. It took them less than a minute to realize the explosion was a diversion, and then they were moving to intercept the fleeing settlers. I was still 50 meters from the valley floor when the shooting started. The first raider to reach the settlers went down hard when Thorn put a rifle round through his chest. The surveyor had found cover behind a fallen tree and was laying down suppressing fire, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. I could see muzzle flashes from at least a dozen positions as the iron serpents moved to surround the group. I hit the ground running, my sidearm in my hand, and murder in my heart. The first raider I encountered was focused on the settlers and never saw me coming. The second one got off a shot that burned past my ear before I put him down. The third one was smart enough to take cover, but not smart enough to check his six before I flanked him. The battle was chaos. The kind of desperate, close-quarters fighting that separates the living from the dead in the space of heartbeats. I moved through the rocks like a ghost, using every trick I'd learned in 15 years of flying dangerous routes and dealing with dangerous people. The raiders were tough and well-armed, but they weren't expecting coordinated resistance. Thorn was magnificent. The man fought like he'd been born to it, his rifle cracking with methodical precision as he picked off raiders who got too close to the civilians. When his ammunition ran low, he switched to a sidearm, and when that ran dry, he picked up a fallen raider's weapon and kept fighting, but we were still outnumbered, and the settlers were trapped in the open with nowhere to run. That's when the storm saved us. The lightning strike hit the raiders' armoured transport dead centre, turning it into a pillar of fire and molten metal. The electromagnetic pulse from the strike fried every piece of electronic equipment within 100 metres, including most of the raiders' weapons. Suddenly, the odds were a lot more even. The remaining iron serpents broke and ran, disappearing into the hills like the cowards they'd always been. I let them go. We didn't have time for pursuit, and the settlers were what mattered. "Everyone all right?" I called out, checking the group for casualties. A few minor injuries, cuts and bruises from the desperate flight through the rocks, but everyone was alive. More importantly, they were moving. The explosion and firefight had cost us precious time, but the settlers seemed energized by their survival, moving with renewed purpose toward their destination. Thorn appeared at my elbow, a field dressing wrapped around his left arm where a raider's bullet had grazed him. "Nice work, Captain. Remind me never to get on your bad side." "Just doing my job," I replied, but I was grinning despite myself. It felt good to be on the right side of a fight for once. We covered the remaining distance to New Providence in record time. The storm was getting worse by the minute. Lightning strikes were coming every few seconds now, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with electrical energy. My hair was standing straight up, and I could taste metal on my tongue. New Providence appeared through the storm like a vision of salvation. A sprawling settlement built around a series of natural caves that ran deep into the planet's crust. The caves would provide protection from the electromagnetic storm, allowing the colonists to wait out the century-long isolation until the phenomenon finally dissipated. Administrator Chen met us at the settlement's edge, his relief visible even through the driving rain and electrical discharge. "Captain Cross, thank God you made it. We were starting to think—" "We're here," I said simply. "All 43 of them, safe and sound." The evacuation of the settlers into the caves was swift and efficient. These people had been preparing for this moment for months, and they knew exactly what to do. Families disappeared into the tunnel mouths with their precious belongings, heading for the deep chambers where they would build new lives in the planet's depths. I found myself standing at the cave entrance with Thorn, watching the last of the settlers disappear into the safety of the underground. The storm was reaching its crescendo now. The sky was a solid sheet of lightning, and the very air seemed to burn with electrical fire. "You should go," Thorn said. "Get back to your ship while you still can." I looked at my chronometer. 15 minutes until the storm became permanent. It would be close, but the Dusty Rose could make it out if I left now. "What about you?" I asked. "Someone needs to help these people get settled. Make sure the atmospheric systems are working, help organize the living spaces, teach them how to survive down there." He smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked truly at peace. "Besides, I've been running from one world to another for too long. Maybe it's time I found a place to call home." I understood. The frontier did that to people. Either it broke them, or it gave them something worth staying for. "Take care of yourself, Marcus Thorn," I said, shaking his hand one last time. "You too, Vera Cross, and thank you for everything." I ran through the storm toward the Dusty Rose, lightning striking the ground around me with increasing frequency. The ship's hull was glowing with electrical discharge, but her systems were still functional. I threw myself into the pilot's seat and began the launch sequence, feeling the storm trying to hold us down with invisible hands. The takeoff was the roughest of my career. Lightning struck the ship twice during ascent, and the electromagnetic interference played havoc with the navigation systems. But the Dusty Rose was tough, built for the harsh realities of frontier trade, and she clawed her way up through the storm like a thing possessed. I broke through the ionosphere with 30 seconds to spare. Below me, Meridian Prime disappeared behind a curtain of permanent electrical storm, cut off from the rest of the galaxy for the next 100 years. But the people were safe, sheltered in the deep caves, ready to build a new civilization in the planet's depths. As I set course for the nearest trade station, I thought about the cargo still sitting in my hold. 12 atmospheric processors that would never reach their destination. The insurance would cover the loss, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that 43 people were alive because sometimes, when the universe doesn't give a damn about your schedule, you have to make your own priorities. The frontier is a hard place, full of dangers and disappointments, but it's also a place where ordinary people can do extraordinary things, where a cargo pilot can become a hero, and where a surveyor can find a home worth staying for. My name is Captain Vera Cross, and I fly the trade routes between the core worlds and the frontier. I've seen pirates and plague ships and solar flares, but I've also seen the best that humanity has to offer. Courage in the face of impossible odds. Sacrifice for the sake of strangers and hope that burns brighter than any star. The Dusty Rose and I have more cargo to haul, more worlds to visit, more people to help. Because out here on the Rim, that's what we do. We keep flying, keep fighting, keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to be right.